Hello and welcome to another episode of Developing Shadows N. This time I want to present you my inventory system, and as you can see here I worked a bit on the interface. Um, on the bottom we have the standard interface, which is for controlling units in battle, and you can, by clicking on this in the bottom left corner, you can open the inventory system when you click on the chest, or if you're pressing the I button. On the left side we have a canvas showing our attributes, because when we switching, for example, if I click on this sword, now it is not longer equipped, so we want the accurate stats to be shown. So for this we want to see the stats every time we are opening the skill system. Just like when we are opening the skill system, here we want to see the stats because they might change while changing our skills. When being in the inventory system, we want to see the skills, the attributes as well. Okay, and yeah, the next thing we want to do is we want to see our unit items. So if we have this unit, I have this items equipped, and here we have our inventory items. We want to see what inventory items we have. We can hover over them and get shown the attributes of the items. We want to see this empty inventory slots because there are might some more, and as you can see here, here our inventory stops. We have no more inventory slots than this. Okay, yeah, and of course we also want to switch between our characters. So if we click on tab for the next unit, we will see the inventory of the next unit. As you see here, we have the stuff equipped. The other things are mainly the same, but here we can change it. And now we see this character is a brigantine equipped, and if we are going to this, we can give him a helmet. Yes, this equipped, and yeah, this is what you expect from an inventory. Nothing too special, and it works just fine. Some special things I have here in my system is I like to have my people have a second weapon set, and let's go to page 1. And for example, this character, he has 2 swords, and as you can see, when I equip this, he has no weapons. So, but if I click on the swords again, now when I left click on this, it's always just swapping the weapons out. So it's not nothing happening when I click this, it's something happening. It's this sword swapping with this one. And for this I did a right click. When I right click this item, I can click on offhand, and now it's equipped on offhand. And I can also go to the control interface and click on weapon swap. Now I'm on the second weapon set. As you can see, he has the bow equipped, and I can, for example, give him the battle axe, and now he has the battle axe. And I can give him a shield. Of course, he can no longer wield a two-handed weapon, so he only has a shield now, and we can give him a sword again, and now he has a nice equipment. Okay, so this works as we wanted to, but how did we do it? So let's go back to the editor. Here in the hierarchy, we have the inventory system where the script is on. We will see all these variables when we go through the script. But of course, it's important to make sure you have all the public variables like the sounds in the system. And here, So to switch the canvas on and off, I have the inventory canvas, and we have inventory backgrounds, unit items, but I think there are two interesting things about the objects here. There's, for once, the order is important, because always what's last in the hierarchy will be painted last on the screen. So, for example, if I want to show a warning image, so for example, you can't equip a certain item, I want to have it last, because then it's painted over everything else. And of course the buttons. For example, when we have the unit items and the inventory items, and they are set up the same. I just used a button here and put event trigger with hover and enter on it, and we'll go into this function later. But we have an on click and the right click. I just used for this. This is something I didn't wrote myself. I found this in a forum. So here I just copied what he did there, and just on pointer click, you just use the right click. So this is my right click event script. If you want to use it as well, you can just copy that. Okay, so I have the button, I have the event trigger, which you can just add by add component event trigger. And this is what I didn't even use a button for the unit items. Where I see the items on the unit itself, I just used a raw image, and here on the raw image I just added the event trigger. So this is not even a UI button, it's just an image, and I added the component event trigger, and the hover enter by using pointer enter and pointer exit calls the hover exit function. And of course, if we are on the unit items, we only can unequip things. So this calls the unequip unit slot function with the corresponding index of this button here. Okay, so we have the unit buttons, which are images, and we have the inventory buttons, where I used not the raw images, but actually the Text Mesh Pro buttons. But I still had, for the hover enter, for the hover image, I still had to add the event trigger system. And here I also had the right click system, which calls another inventory function, the right click options. And these buttons are the buttons where I switch between the inventory page. So here I load inventory page 0, 1, and 2. Before you start programming, it's best to visualize things first. And so even you probably will have to rework everything. So me as well, I did this. Even maybe if you think this doesn't look like much, I reworked it like 3 or 4 times. And even technically, I reworked my whole inventory system. Before, I didn't use the units items, so the upper part was missing, and the inventory system could do the same, but it was much more complicated due to not having the specific slots for each unit. And yeah, also the most important point probably, As a developer, I hadn't had in mind that for the player themselves, as a player, you don't have an idea which item is actually at which unit if you don't see it like this. So always keep in mind how the player experiences the game and not only you as a developer. So there is always a lot of iterations of developing. Okay, so let's get into the inventory system script. So in Awake, we declare this as an instance. Nothing special. In Start, also nothing very special. We are getting the main camera to display sounds. We get our item stats list. This is something I will probably rework later on as well. Right now I have an item name list for me for testing the game, so I can just type in names into the inventory system, and when I start the game, the item stats list, which are scripts as well. So this array item stats list is a list of scripts which contain the data for each item. So this goes from 0 to the whole inventory capacity and checks what name is in the list, and if there is no name, it adds an empty item into the list. And for example, if I put a sword in there and I wrote as name sword, then here it loads from the equipment folder the weapon sword, and this weapon stats is the class. This is where the item stats are stored. So I get a list, an item stats list where all the scripts for the items are stored. Okay, so this happens when we're starting the scene. Maybe later on I will not use names anymore. I will just use the scripts and just add the scripts in the editor before start the game and put in or take out the scripts while running the game. So when I'm playing the game, I need to initialize. So here we get data for the inventory, but how do we call the canvas? When we call the canvas, we initialize the inventory. So we load the inventory page, which is the buttons with the inventory slots. The unit page, which is my name for the page, this top thing here, so you know what we're talking about. So this is I call this the unit page because here are the items for the currently selected unit, and at the bottom we have the inventory where we have the inventory items. Okay, so we load the inventory page, we load the unit inventory page, and then we update the unit stats. So as well as we have this inventory, we also want to, every time we are loading the inventory, we want to see the stats. So here you can see nothing is in this field. We want to load the stats of the unit into this. Okay, so this is happening in this 3 function. Let's have a look into this function. So load unit page. We get a unit item stats list, so which stats do the items of the unit have. For this we are getting all the stats of the units. So we get, this is my class fighter. This is where I store the methods and the variable for each fighter in the game. So if it is a dragon or a troll or just a human, they are just using this class fighter. And here I get the class for my unit selected. So I go into my unit selection system, which is an instance as well, go into the unit list, and there I go to which unit is currently selected. So this is how I also can easily switch in my inventory from unit to unit, because because I'm still using the unit selection system, and when I'm in the unit selection system, of course, I can switch between the units, and this is what I'm using here to also get the right unit in my inventory system. Okay, and each component fighter has stored its weapons, so as strings. So here we are loading again the weapon stats for each item, and if the unit has no item, then the string is empty, and we add an empty cell to the list, so no script will be there. We do this for all these variables for the unit, and then for every script we are also getting the right textures for the fields, because as you've seen before, when I had the units here, there was a sort, there was another sort, so instead of this image here, this background images, here it is two pictures are background images as well, but they are transparent now. So when there is no item, then this texture will be shown, and this is also a list where here are unit equip button sprites. Here I store all the sprite images if there is no item equipped, but if there is an item equipped, I get my item icon from the weapon stats script and put this texture on the raw image, and here it gets full visibility, and if there is nothing equipped, instead of having 255 alpha value, we have a lower alpha value to make the picture slightly transparent. Also, we disable the event trigger because we don't want to show any stats anyway, and we can't click no item, so we disable it. And of course, if we have an item there, we enable it. So this is loading the unit items. Then we have the load inventory page. So here we are getting the page, which is defined on each button. So so we get the inventory page, we get the button index, we set it to 0, because this is important, because this button index is for the different buttons of the inventory. Because remember, we have the buttons here in the unit page, but we also have 30 buttons here in the inventory page. And this button index refers to the buttons of the inventory page. Now we are going, depending on the page, we are going from I equals 0, the page times inventory page length, which in our case is 30. And if we are starting on page 1, on the first page, which is page 0, and then we have 0 times 30, so we're starting at 0, and we are going until we reach page plus inventory page length. So, for example, if we initialize it first, we are going from 0 to 29, as I wrote here in the comment. Yeah, and for each button we get the button image, which is which we get here from the children of the button, and if we are bigger than the inventory capacity, we get the unavailable slots texture. But right now, as you've maybe seen, this red axis weren't shown when I was in the inventory before, and this is because I disabled the button here. So this is something maybe for I can still think about this solely about visuals. I could just not set it false, nothing would happen because there would be no item, and then there would be these red X buttons, but I just can also set it to false, and then we will have this what we've seen before, that there is nothing to see. So we go from I to inventory capacity, and if there's nothing, we set it to false right now. So right now this here does nothing. This would only do something if we had it still as active. But since let's comment it out for now, because we don't need it. So, but if we're not bigger, if we are going through every button and we are not at the maximum inventory capacity yet, we set the button to active, and if the item stats list, which is storing our scripts of the item stats, if it's empty, then we get this empty slot texture, which is predefined, like the unavailable slot texture. And if it's not empty, we are getting the icon from the item stats list. And since we are going from button to button and from point to point through the inventory by adding I, we also have to increase the button index here, because we are always going from 0 to 29 for the button index, because we have 30 buttons here. But for example, if we are loading inventory page 2, we are going from 30 to 59 through the inventory. So we have different, if we're not on the first page, I and button index are different. If we're on the first inventory page, I and button index are actually equal numbers. Yeah, but this is the inventory page. Similar to the load unit page, it just shows us the right items that are in the inventory right now. Okay, and the last thing about initializing the inventory is updating the stats, which is pretty straightforward. We already got the stats of the fighter before, and here we are going through the unit stats list, and the first unit stats is the attribute points, and the next one is the HP points, and so on. So here we are just displaying the stats of the current fighter. So the stats are the stats of the current fighter we have selected, and the unit stats list point text is the field here. So for this field, for example, hit points, which is 1, we set the current HP / the maximum HP and display it. So this also is similar to the other two methods we just took a look at, are just showing showing the right stats. And since we have two weapon sets, we want to show the player which is the currently selected weapon set. So here you can see both of these purple frames, but of course in the game these frames are for showing the player which second weapon set is equipped right now. So we only want the one active that is showing which is currently equipped. So this is also a skill in the fighter class. In the fighter class, you can during the fight you can swap out the weapon. So that's why I called it skill. and it's the skill 4, which is swapping the weapons. Every fighter has the same skill 4, the weapon swap. And if it's active, we're in the second weapon set, so we set the weapon set frame 2 active, and otherwise we set 1 active. Okay, so pretty straightforward so far. We are just displaying the inventory page, the unit items, and the unit stats. Okay, but now we are getting to the more complex part, which is equipping an item. So to break this down a little bit, let's start with a little, to portion this maybe a little bit, let's start with the simpler part. Because when we equip an item, we have to also check which item is already equipped. And there we also have to take into account, is it a weapon? Which type of weapon is it? Because as you have seen before, when I have a two-handed weapon like a bow equipped, and I equip a shield, the bow becomes unequipped. So there are a lot of cases, and we will look at these cases later. But to break it down into parts, let's have a look at unequipping first. So because if I unequip an item from my character, I don't have to check too much with the inventory. I just have to go through the inventory, look for a free slot, and if there is a free slot, I can just take this item and put it there. Okay, so let's get to this function first, the unequip unit slot. And I have a bool here, which I made a global bool because I wasn't sure if I used it several times. So we have this bool, we set it to false because we want to use it in our search for an empty slot in the inventory. So we are going through the inventory from inventory slot 0 to inventory capacity as long as we haven't found an empty slot. So as long as this variable is false. Okay, and then we just go to the item stat list. Remember, the item stat list is the list of scripts which contain all the item stats. So, and if the item stat list is 0, that's because we are searching for an empty slot, then we found our empty slot. So if maybe let's go to the other case first. If there is no empty slot, we are going to the next eye and so on. And if there are no empty slots, the unequip unit slot will do nothing. So here nothing will happen. And if if we find an empty slot, so if the items stats list for the specific value I is null, we set the bool to true, so we stop the iteration in the next step, and we remove the unit item stats list to this is to ensure that I disabled the buttons anyway, but if the item maybe is not disabled, we check again if the unit slot isn't empty. So if the unit item slot type is bigger than 10, we have an armor item, and for armor items we then have to write into the script of the unit that there is no item anymore, and that's depending on the item slot type. If the item slot type is 11, for example, then it's armor, helmet, and so on. And for this, I go into my character entity script, which I also declared as my entity. And here again, I call on the unit list. This just calls the current unit and its component character entity. This is the this script contains all the meshes for the character. So it's this is the how our character looks pretty much, and we want to unequip the item here. So for example, if I unequip the armor will be gone and we see the chest of the character. But this is just the looks, so we also have to call equip item stats. And here we have two variables for equip item stats. This calls this gives the unit item stat list. So this is actually a script here which contains the stats of the item again, and we can put in 1 here for adding the items, or -1 for unequipping the items. And then here we are done. We change the visuals and we change the stats. And if it's not item slot type bigger than 0, then it's a weapon, and then we are going into unequipped weapon. Okay, and after we equipped the item stats, or we unequipped the weapon, we are writing in our item stats list the stats of the unit item stats list. So for example, if we unequipped our sword, we write the sword script into the in the free slot we found in the item stats list, and then we zero out our sword in unit item stats list because we just unequipped it, and we give to our cam audio that we play 1 times the unequipped sound. And if we didn't find an empty slot, here we are using after the loop, we are using our bool again. If we didn't find an empty slot, we starting the coroutine no empty slot, which is our warning image, and otherwise we are going back to initialize our inventory. Okay, so let's have a short look at equip item stats, unequip weapon, and the coroutine no empty slot to finish up the unequipping part. So if we unequip a weapon, or let's start here, equip item stats, which is very simple. We have the weapon stats, which we referenced here by taking it from the unit item stat list, and depending on if we are unequipping or equipping, we put -1 in here, so we are multiplying all stats by -1, which means we are subtracting the stats of the weapon from the character stats itself. And here we actually also have to calculate some skills like the armor master skill and the armor habituation skill, but aside from this skill, we simply add or remove the weapon stats from the character stats. Okay, so this is what happens if we remove or add an armor item to the character. And we have a different function for the weapon because we are using our instance to a weapon equip system, which I'm not going into detail here because this could easily fill another video. Because depending on the weapon, as you may have seen in the video in the start of the video, the character controller change. So the fighting stance of the character change, because we want different animations for different weapons, of course. And also in my game, the skills a character can use also depend on the weapon. And also we have a lot of skills that are applied to the weapon. And due to these facts, this is an instance by itself, which is maybe as complex as this method here, maybe more. Okay, so to equip a weapon, we are unequipping all current weapons. similar to before. If we unequip, we just put a -1 here. We get the strings from the character fields. Then, depending on what type of weapon we have here, we are unequipping or item slot type. We are changing, if it's a one-handed weapon, we are changing the string for the one-handed weapon. If it's an offhand weapon, we are changing this string. And so on. So if it's two-handed, we are zero out weapon 1 and 2. You can see this is very similar to the equip weapon method, but I divided it since there are also a few steps they are different. So here because we're just unequipping here, from the depending on the unit slot index, which means the unit slot index is just here 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So just going through these items of the unit. So we just zero out the strings here, depending on which items we are unequipping, and then we are writing. We are loading our. Okay, so we have an important case here as well. So case 4 is when we equipped an offhand weapon, which is not a shield. For example, in the starting video, I used the sword in the offhand. So if we are unequipping a sword in the offhand, of course, on our character, we want to zero out the offhand the character is wearing, but also in the unit item stat list, we want to have the sword as normal sword again, because when it's equipped to a character, it's the offhand sword. And this is because we have, for offhand and mainhand, we have two different swords, because in the swords themselves, I wrote how they will be equipped to a character. And of course, the offhand will be equipped to the offhand. And since this is different, these are actually two different items. And since I load them by their respective name, I remove the last part of the name, which, for example, here, if we're going back to the sword as using as offhand, the name of the sword will be arming sword offhand. So I removed the last 8 letters, which are minus offhand. So I remove minus offhand from the name, and then when I put then I load the non-offhand sword again, which is just, instead of arming sword offhand, it's just the arming sword, and get these weapon stats again. So we can go to the next step, where we write the script of the unit item stat list into the item stat list of the inventory. Okay, and we have now we have unequipped our weapon and have the right weapon on our character, and we can put the right weapon into the inventory. And of course, we have to check if which unit slot index is it. So is it for the second weapon stats or the first weapon stats, and also which is currently active, because if we are unit slot index is lower than 2, which means we are on the first 2 slots, which is the first weapon set. But if the character currently is using the second weapon stats, we don't need to actually unequip the weapons, because the unequipping is for the stats, and the stats aren't used actually. So maybe in the picture it can become more clearly what I mean by that. For example, is here, this is my first weapon set, And now when I unequip the bow, I don't want to change my stats. So I'm not using the unequip function here. I'm just using, I load everything and stuff, but I'm not changing the stats because the stats are not depending on the weapon sets that is not used. We're using this weapon set. So this is why I have this if condition here. So we only need to unequip and equip the weapons if the unit slots that are selected by the player are the unit slots that are currently active. We still have to rewrite the stats of the character, but only if the stats like this. Here when I remove the sword, I want to remove the stats as well. But if it's the other, the unused slot, I don't want to change the stats. Okay, so this is what happens here. And at least for the, and to sum up the unequipping, if there is no empty slot, if all our inventory is full, we are calling a warning sound. We are setting the warning canvas to true, so the player cannot click anything. And we set the warning text to no empty slot available. We wait for 2 seconds, and it's important to use real time here, by the way, because maybe the game could be paused. We don't know. Maybe at some point in the game it is possible to pause the game here. So we still want to display the warning for a short period of time. And then, of course, we set the warning canvas to inactive again, so the player can go on with the game. Okay, so this is unequipping things. We put them from the unit's inventory slots into the inventory. And now we can use this for equipping. So if we equip an item, maybe I have a few, 1 or 2 steps too much in here right now, but yeah, we're still in developing phase, so everything is fine. When we equip an item, which means we are now clicking, the player is clicking on one of these buttons in the inventory. So each of these buttons has references its own index here. So in this function we have the button index, but the button index is not the inventory index because the inventory goes over several pages. So we calculate the inventory slot index by multiplying the inventory page with the inventory page length. So, and then we get if there is an inventory, if there is a script with the item stats. If there isn't, nothing happens, of course, and if there is, we are saving the current weapon stats, which is whatever is written in the place in the item stat list, and we check if what unit slot this is, because there could be any item in the slot. So let's check. We set found empty slot to true and dual wielding check to true, and the unit slot index to 0, because this is a local variable which we are now changing. So we saved our weapon stats of the item we just clicked in, which was placed onto our button in the inventory. So let's say we just clicked here and there was, for example, the two-handed axe. Then we get the axe, and find in the weapon stats of the axe which item slot type it is. And since the axe is a two-handed weapon, the item slot type will be not 1, not 2, but 3. And 3 means we have to, if we are on the second weapon, we overwrite the first, the main hand and offhand. And if we are on the first weapon set, we are overwriting the first main hand and offhand. And we do this for all different kind of slots. So for armors, it's pretty simple. We just can directly refer to the unit slot index depending on the armor type. But again, for weapons, it's a bit more complicated because we have these 2 weapon sets. So if it's a sword, it can be, depending on if we are on weapons set 2 or 1, it can be unit slot index 2 or 0. If it's offhand, it can be 3 or 1. And since if it's offhand, it could mean that we have to unequip either a 2-handed weapon or an offhand. We also have to check this. As you can see here by my comment in the here, check if 2-handed weapon is equipped. So we go into the corresponding weapon slot and check if it's item slot type 0, and if it's item slot type 3. And if it is, we unequip it here. Now that I think about it, I'm not even sure if this is necessary here. This is something I have to check later. But if it's necessary here or not doesn't matter, because for us now to understand this, because we definitely need this part here when we have an offhand. Because if we are equipping a 2-handed weapon, here it is definitely important. If we are equipping a 2-handed weapon, the main hand and the offhand have to be unequipped. So what we are going to do, we are writing, if we have, let's assume we are clicking on the X here, and our character has 2 swords equipped, which means our 2-handed X should go into unit slot index 0, which is the main hand weapon of weapon set 1. But we also have to unequip the second sword. And we already checked our unequip unit slot. What's important now here is that we are unequipping here the second weapon before we are equipping the X, because if here we don't find an empty slot, we are getting no empty slot found, which will trigger here no empty slot found, and we get a warning instead of equipping anything. So if we are trying to equip an X and we have two weapons equipped and there is no empty slot in our inventory, this will return false and we will get a warning and nothing will happen. And similarly, if we want to equip an offhand, when clicking equip offhand, which we are doing with the right click, we are changing the inventory slot from arming sword to arming sword offhand. And then in arming sword offhand, the weapon type is 4 and not 1 anymore. And this is what we are checking here. So we are going to make the dual wielding check false, and we are making it false if the first weapon isn't the same as the second weapon. So what's happening here is that, for example, we could also have a one-handed axe equipped, and if I now right-click on my arming sword to equip it as offhand, Then we are going, what's happening is I'm loading the offhand arming sword for my sword, and then I check if the offhand is empty, but it doesn't not only need to be empty, the other weapon also needs to be a sword. And if it is not a sword, but for example an axe, then it's a different weapon type. And we are going to do a wielding check false. Otherwise, we are equipping it to the offhand, of course. So if the dual wielding check gets false here, we are getting the warning, dual wielding warning, which says here need 2 weapons of the same type for dual wielding. So only if this is and again, if this happens, this coroutine starts and nothing else will happen. Well, not nothing. You may have seen there are a few things happening here in the dual wielding warning, because we have to remove again. We have to change back the arming sword offhand to be the arming sword in the inventory list. Okay. Otherwise, it's relatively simply. So we are going to all cases, if it's what kind of weapon it is or what kind of armor it is, and it's getting much simpler if it's not a two-handed weapon and not a dual wielding weapon. And so if the dual wielding check was alright, or if we found an empty slot, remember, found an empty slot is always true if we don't equip a two-handed weapon. And because when we're not equipping a two-handed weapon, the slot which we are equipping is getting empty, so we don't need to check if there is an empty slot, because if I click, for example, on this white field here to equip my weapon, and this is one-handed weapon, this field is getting empty, and we can always, doesn't matter if there is a weapon or not, if there is a weapon we can put it in the same field, so we know we will have a free slot. So what we're doing is now we are going to clear the slot in our inventory. We can do this because in the previous step we saved the weapon stats of the slot, so we now clear the slot. Then we unequip the slot in the unit slots, which we took a look at in previously, and now we are going into equip unit slot. And after that, we are going to initialize the inventory again to update all current images and stats. Okay, so in the equip unit slot, again, we have to see if it is a weapon or an armor. For an armor, we are getting the character entity again. We are changing the item appearance with the item stats. We are adding the item stats here. So here we have +1 and not -1. And we write into the character stats the name of the new item. And if it's a weapon, we are going to equip the weapon, similar to our unequip weapon method we used before. And then we have our weapon equipped. Lastly here we have the right-click options, and again we need to get the right inventory slot index, and we only set the offhand button to enabled. So I can show you this. So if I right click on pants, for example, there is no offhand button. There is an offhand button, but nothing happens when I click it. So I only can click cancel or drop item. But if I right click on the sword, I can also equip it. Yeah, you wouldn't see anything here because it would just swap places with this item. But here again, this is also a weapon, but I cannot equip it as offhand because it's not a one-handed weapon. So now I just dropped it and it's just gone from my inventory. Okay, and this is what happens here. I get the drop button canvas and I set the buttons to enabled depending on what item I clicked, and then I start the coroutine 2, which waits for the player input if I click the button, and depending on the input on the option, it either clears the slot by cancel, does nothing, or if option 2 is available and I clicked it, then we are going to equipping the item, which then does everything we talked about before. So thank you for your attention. I hope you found it interesting and hopefully you learned something new. Feel free to ask questions if you like, and yeah, hope to see you soon. Bye bye.